The Sesh.
Hey guys, it's 4:20 and welcome to the Coastie Sesh. We talk about real stuff like addiction and mental health with real people who live it every day. Just a disclaimer, any views or opinions described are not always reflective of the Community Drug Action Team or Coast Community Connections. Please do your own research before taking anything as fact. With clients around addiction, what have you seen coming in as a caseworker?
I guess I've seen a few young people, especially with a few addictions, and it causing them to, maybe draw away from normal life activities or family or friends. A big thing at the moment maybe being social media addiction. So I've seen that a lot in terms of drug and alcohol. I mean, definitely young people saying that they're, addicted to maybe smoking weed, and then trying to draw back from it because they can tell that they're not, sleeping properly, or it's causing them to have arguments with their family members, and then falling right back into it, because it is an addiction and your body is going to crave what it knows. There's a few things that I've seen.
Yeah. Well, let's have a bit of a chat about weed, cannabis, marijuana, its million names that it has, Puff the Magic Dragon, whatever you like to call it. I don't know about you, but I listened to Puff the Magic Dragon when I used to sleep when I was a kid. It's my favourite thing to listen to. It's got a different meaning these days.
I can slightly remember that, actually. You're ringing a bell there. Yeah, I'm going to have to look that up. That's actually really funny.
Live by the sea. And
yes, you're taking me back.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to have to. I love that singing.
Wasn't the most beautiful singing in the world. I can't really remember. But, let's have a chat, because I also work with a few people in addiction, and most kids that are not sort of saying that they have an addiction yet are saying that they're trying weed, have smoked it casually, and they kind of come with the belief that you can't get addicted, it's not dangerous, there's no harm in just trying it. And I think that's really interesting that we as counsellors, caseworkers have also seen a lot of kids really struggling with the addiction part and that getting off it and stopping. So what do you think that you've seen so far that tells you that it is addictive and that this is a serious drug?
It's addictive because, like anything, you try a little bit, whether that's socially, by yourself, or just as like a little, don't say really hobby, but just like, I really want to try these. Teens are curious. And then, if they like it, they might continue it, or they might continue it on, a fortnightly basis or whatever it might be. But the thing is, your body becomes used to that, and the potency is going to increase over time. And you're going to want to do it more frequently because your brain is going, oh, I really like this. So I guess that's how the addiction kind of starts, and where it stems from, doing it by yourself in your room, just maybe casually because you've seen someone do it, or you're smoking it with your friends in a social setting at a party. Yeah.
That's really interesting. You're right. When you mentioned potency, it made me think, like, imagine if we went to the shopping centre to, like, go buy our chocolate, because that's what I go to the shopping centre for, is to buy my chocolate. I like to pick it out myself, see what's available, if there's any new flavours. But imagine if you went and it was kind of like those, when we were kids, there's like those Lucky Dips, and they like have male, female as the areas, which they now just have Lucky Dip in general, which is probably good. But you don't know what's in there. And so you're just kind of buying a prize of some sort that you don't know what it's going to be. And imagine if chocolate was like that. Like, you went to the shopping centre and you're like, I want chocolate. And you just ordered it, and you didn't know whether you were going to get 80% dark chocolate, whether you're going to get like Kit Kat Gold today, or like Milky with choc chip, or classic like Smarties blend. And it was just hot luck, or Turkish Delight. I'm not a Turkish Delight girl. Imagine if you got Turkish Delight. I'd be so devastated. But imagine if that was what happened with our other foods. Like, because you're right, with the potency thing and it not being regulated, kids are going out to the shop, which is the black market, or a dealer, and buying what they think is cannabis. But there are different types, and there are different potencies from 5% to 70% THC. It's kind of like the dark chocolate thing. You didn't know whether you're going to get 90% cocoa or like milk chocolate, which I don't know. I don't know what percentage milk chocolate is. 20%? I don't know.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes. And I know when I've eaten dark chocolate for a long period of time, when you eat like the milk chocolate again, you're like, is this even chocolate? Like, it tastes so sugary, and it's kind of like it doesn't even hit the spot anymore. And it's not even an illicit drug that creates changes in the brain. So I can imagine that, if you're buying from a dealer and you don't know if you're getting 20% or 70%, I can see how you would kind of always be chasing that higher amount. I can imagine the same thing would happen with chocolate. And I see it happen with alcohol a bit too. Kids using cruisers at parties, which has actually got quite a high alcohol amount in it, but you can't taste it. And then once they have something like beer again, it's like, oh, that's pretty low alcohol content. And then they start on wine, which has quite a high alcohol content. And it kind of increases and increases.
Yep.
Why do you think there's these, or what do you think about these certain drugs that we kind of classify as being different? For example, obviously things like caffeine is a drug, chocolate is technically a drug, sugar is a drug. What do you think that difference is that crosses this line into what we call this illicit drug?
Probably the way that whatever you're consuming reacts with your neurons in your brain, basically. There's going to be higher amounts of a specific sugar or drug or chemical in something that's going to make your brain kind of think that, oh, I want that more. And I'm going to always be chasing it because it's not enough. And I guess that's why I can call it an addiction, because you're always chasing that high. Whereas, you can have, chocolate every day of the week, but then if you go 2 days without it, you're probably going to be craving it, but you're not going to be maybe sweating, or your throat's going to start, closing in or whatever. There's different, like we said before, potencies of chemicals in things, and I think illicit drugs are so high, and your I think, your dopamine in your brain is, so high, and it's so stimulated by the specific chemicals that illicit drugs has, that you're going to be going so high with something and crashing down so fast.
Yeah.
And your brain is going to want it again because it loves that feelings when you're super high and you've got that mad dopamine rush and you've been stimulated. So there's a huge difference between an illicit drug and some sugar and some chocolate. It's not going to create the same neurotransmitter pattern in your brain. I guess that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, I like that. And when I'm working with kids, I often describe it as bags in your head as such. And let's say with food, we've got a bag, which is kind of like our brain telling us if our stomach is empty or not. And when we eat, that bag gets full and it tells our body, oh, you're full, you don't need to eat anymore. And then it reduces over our day or however long till our next meal when it's expecting food again, and it just fills and empties, but it's just the one bag. But with illicit substances, and the same happens for caffeine, for sugar, it's just that one bag system. But with illicit drugs, I kind of explain it to them that it's like you start off with one bag for dopamine, which our body naturally uses. And with the natural processes, it might fill that bag like it does with food and empty it. But when we take a drug like marijuana, like alcohol, like cocaine, meth, heroin, it's kind of like for every time you fill that bag, it creates a new bag that's empty already. And so every time you have a smoke or something like that, yes, you might fill your bag and that feels great.
Yep.
But you've also now created another bag that needs filling the next time you crave. And so you're always increasing that amount of bags that you have to fill, and you can never fill them.
Yeah. It's like a crave reward kind of system. You know, you're going to be developing some sort of addiction, maybe you could call it. Your brain's going to crave it even more when you don't have it, and you reward your brain again with that same substance or a higher substance, and you're creating another bag. It's just going to keep going around in that little cycle. And then again, you're going to have those mad dopamine rushes and you're going to drop off again, and your brain's going to want it again. You can create even bigger bag maybe to fill that craving, to reward, go again. So I definitely agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. And I think another major difference is, like, you are never going to, as far as I know anyway, I've never heard of it, never heard of anyone dying from withdrawing from caffeine or chocolate or sugar. But there are drugs that you can die from withdrawing from. So obviously that chemical need for the drug is so high that your body can actually shut down completely in withdrawing from it. So that tells me that there is something significantly or massively different in illicit drugs to things like sugar, caffeine, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. It affects the signaling processes in your neurons in your brain. It's so dense, it's so potent. You're kind of, let's say, snapping those little wires in your brain and they're not connecting anymore. And there's always, you know, really huge effects of long-term substance use.
Tell us a bit about the long-term effects that you've seen just with people that you've spoken to.
Well, it's sad in a way. I guess your body is always craving that next high, and it has that euphoric stage, and when you're not having it, you know, the people that you're seeing or experiencing that with look so sad and low and with no energy, no motivation to do anything. It's because, you know, their body is just on this roller coaster, and their brain capacity and functioning is not working as to what it used to. So they're completely different people. as to what they would be if they weren't using or if they hadn't used in the past. We could go really deep into the brain here, but their synapses aren't connecting. It's not the same person anymore, and the messages aren't getting sent through. They might look really dull and tired, like I said before.
Really like the idea of the roller coaster, because I've seen with some people that I've counselled coming off some substances, and a lot of the time I think people struggle with their moment where they decide to choose to no longer use a substance. One, because your body is crying out saying, don't do this is scary. But two, it's not just a chemical change. It's a habit of that roller coaster. And a similar thing happens with trauma and people who have been in families of domestic violence. When you get used to a life that is a roller coaster of emotions, let's say, whether it be that your family moves house to house and you're always changing friends and you're always changing jobs and, you know, mum and dad are getting back together and breaking apart. You, when you become your own human, tend to go towards that sort of life yourself where you'll switch jobs, you'll move homes, because it's a habit. And you're right, you know, while you're using a drug, yes, chemically it's going to change things. But in terms of habits, you also get used to that same roller coaster of a life. And just because you stop using a drug, it doesn't mean that you suddenly know how to cope with all of that.
Yeah.
I also found it so interesting. When I was at uni studying substances, we spoke a lot about how it's not just the chemical. There's something that's like the chemical that's actually within the drug has an impact on the effects it has on a person. And then there's where you take it, with whom. And then so that's like the environment or the setting. And then there's internally what you actually expect to happen. So, for example, if I'm going to use nothing and then go use meth might have a really big impact, because in my head I'm going, holy dooly, this is a massive step. This is a crazy drug. What am I doing? I'm already amping myself up. I'm already preparing my body to be able to process that drug faster, and I'm more likely to experience those sorts of effects.
So, you're right, yeah.
When people,
your adrenaline mixed in with it. So you've got two chemicals in your body that are, you know, mixing together.
And that placebo effect of whatever you expect to happen kind of ends up happening. So, and it goes one of two ways. You know, I gave the example of going an extreme step, but it also happens in the slippery slope example where someone might, you know, smoke a cigarette every so often or vape, and then they might smoke cigarettes, and then someone offers them cannabis mixed with cigarettes, and they're like, well, it's basically the same thing. I'm already smoking. And so they're expecting it to feel the same. And so when they then smoke marijuana, they're like, oh, that was hardly different. What's the go? Like, this is no big deal. So then they might be like, oh, I get offered to snort some cocaine. I already do some of this. It's not like I'm using needles. And they'd expect it to not be that much different. And so it doesn't have this massive impact, how people talk about drugs being, oh, don't do that drug, you'll die. And so I can understand some kids falling down that slope where the expectation is like, oh, I guess it's pretty similar. It's not going to have that big of an impact. And because they're already in that frame of mind, it doesn't have as big of an impact.
Yeah, your frame of mind definitely influences the way the drug's going to work on your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also really liked how we got shown like a graph of the dopamine and endorphins in our body when we take drugs. And the high of the dopamine is actually in the expectation of taking the drug, not the actual use of it. So like they've timed it out in milliseconds on a graph, and obviously you go from what your normal amount of dopamine in your brain is, and then you're, let's say, about to take your first hit of the marijuana, you've got it in your hand. That's actually, when you're about to breathe in, is when the dopamine hits at its highest. And then actually once it starts to cycle in, it actually starts to drop off, and that will continue to happen as you use the drug. So it's really, really interesting when they've studied people who expect to have a drug and it's actually nothing, or they know it's their time when they usually have the drug and it's nothing. It's really interesting because the dopamine, again, it rises up like it's going to have it, and then it realizes it's not going to, and it just drops off, and there's this like emptiness that needs to be filled. And so it's that same idea of, I don't know, I've had an example where when I wanted my first cat, I looked up this cat, and it was so cute. It looked like my cat now. And I asked my husband, and I had to beg him, and he finally said yes. And I sent away the message to get her. And that night I was dreaming about having this cat next to my bed and having the cat bed. I thought of her name. I'd imagined the moments where she was running around the house. And the next morning, I was so happy about it. I was like, oh, I've got this girl. I've got this beautiful girl cat. She's a kitten. She's sweet. I've got her name. I don't even have her yet. The next day I realized she had already been taken by someone else who didn't get her. And I was seriously grieving that. And so I can understand a similar thing happens in the chemicals of the brain, where you expect to have the hit of the drug as you expect it to be. And if there isn't, of course your brain basically chucks a tantrum, like how I chucked a tantrum around not getting my cat.
Yeah. And I guess maybe that can really relate to some young people and teens, in that, you know, if they're having a hit of a bong at home and they're having a hit of a bong at a party with so many people around and peer pressure and loud music, you know, it can really hit you differently, because your expectations are going to be different. Your chemicals in your own body are going to be different. You know, you've heard people say, oh, I had this huge trip at a party from weed, but it doesn't usually happen to me at home when I'm sitting on the couch or sitting in my bed. So I can definitely relate back to what you were saying before. It hits everyone differently with the expectation that they already have of what they're taking.
Yeah, and who they're around and the environment of when it's happening. You know, if you go to a party, you're going to kind of expect yourself to be energetic, talking with people. So if you take a drug in that scenario, you're probably going to do that more so. And you're probably going to have that experience where it's like, oh, I love how social I am. I love how much I enjoy the party when I'm on it, because you're already expecting that.
Yeah.
Because I was working in a rehab at the time, seeing people come in, particularly around alcohol, and knowing that they were going to leave the rehab in a year's time, because the rehab was a year long. And I was trying to make safety plans with them and relapse prevention plans. And I was thinking to myself while making these plans with them, where is safe for them in community to not drink alcohol? Most of these people, their things that they would still like to do would be going to the sporting events at like Gosford Stadium. What do you see there? People slushing alcohol, beer everywhere. They can't get away from it. Or if it's, you know, betting and they love to go watch the sport. I've sat at home and the amount of like betting ads, and I'm like, these people can't get away from these things. Or like they love going to have a pub meal. Like that's a classic family thing, especially with all these. What's there? People at pubs drinking. You get invited out to a games night. You're expected to drink. And so I made this personal decision while being there. I thought, well, I don't expect anyone else to do this at all. But I thought, well, if one person in society is starting that pathway where they decide to say no to alcohol when they're offered and don't have to say, oh yeah, sorry, it's because I'm an addict and I don't drink now. I can just say, nah, I'm good, and still enjoy my time. Then we can start to make that pathway for people to not be expected to do that.
Yeah, start to normalise it a little bit more.
Yeah, because I think there are so many expectations in society that it's like, oh yeah, one day we'll just drink, or every teenager, you know, will smoke marijuana, but realistically it's like 15%. You know, the majority of people don't try it as a teenager.
And you don't have to. You know, not an expectation that once you hit 17, 18, you're going to have a joint, or, you know, you have to have one as like a rite of passage. You know, you don't have to. You can normalize, no, I don't want it. And the other person or other people need to accept that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can become more accepting of everyone, you know, not judging people that are really struggling, because we know that just isolates them and makes them want to be more secretive, and it makes it more troubling for the person. But also more accepting of people who want to say no. Like, they should have both choices and not be judged for either choice, just be supported as a human being.
Yeah, yep, you're right.
So I think that's I think that's a pretty good place to end it on, really.
Yeah, yep.
Thanks so much for coming on and chatting today. Have you got any last words for anyone who might be listening and sort of really trying to figure things out for themselves?
I encourage you to come back onto our channel and listen to more of our stories, our facts, our lived experiences from others who are going to be coming on and having their own chats with us. Stay safe and reach out if you need support. And it's okay not to be involved with drugs and alcohol, and to speak up if you really don't want to be. So we look forward to seeing you next time when you come back to listen to our podcast.
Hell yeah. The Coastie Sesh. If you or someone else needs support, please reach out. You can always call emergency, the Kids Helpline, Lifeline. There's also online supports like Bite Back and Mood Gym. So don't do this alone.